Shabbat Shalom. So you may have seen on our Facebook page or in the Houston Chronicle this morning that Beth Yeshurun was honored to host an event yesterday morning that was pretty exciting. 4 FBI agents were getting the Congressional Badge of Bravery. So this is apparently a new honorary badge that was designated by Congress, and they're one of the first recipients, as I understand it, of this Badge of Bravery. And so what was it about, and why did we have this ceremony here? So what happened 2 years ago during Hurricane Harvey was these 4 special agents of the FBI came and rescued the entire police department that was next door to us over here during the flood. And the reason we hosted this event was because that building is no longer being used. So we were the closest building to have an event at, and we also flooded, so it was felt appropriate to have the ceremony here. So what happened was, during the flood, which we all experienced, the police department over here was flooded. They had nowhere to go, and they called the FBI. And 4 special agents from the FBI came out, and it wasn't clear to me whether they came in a boat or a high-rise truck, a very high-rise vehicle. And they came to the police department and rescued all the police officers there and took them to a hotel down on Main Street. By an odd coincidence, that was the same hotel that my family had evacuated to just a couple hours earlier. And we went out when we weren't supposed to, when it was raining and flooding the streets. We found a way to drive safely from our house to this hotel. And later on, I saw all these policemen congregating in the lobby in the hotel, and I asked them what they were doing there. And they said, well, our building was flooded. So I asked them, well, is your building the one that's next to Beth Yeshurun? They said, yeah. So they had set up their entire operation there with telephones and walkie-talkies and everything. This was their base of operations, where they went and helped other people at this hotel. But how they got there was from the bravery of these 4 FBI agents who jumped into the storm and started rescuing people. And while they were rescuing the police department, they noticed that across the street on Beechnut, there was another group of civilians who were standing on top of their cars because their cars were flooded and the water was rising up to the top of their cars. So they were stranded on top of their cars trying to avoid getting drowned. And so after they finished rescuing the police department, they came back and rescued all these civilians and brought them to safety as well. And they rescued a bunch of other people that night. So because of their act of bravery, the Senate voted to give them this special badge of bravery. And Friday morning, we had Senator Cornyn and our mayor, Sylvester Turner, who were there doing a presentation. And I guess, it made the media. So Rabbi Strauss wasn't here, so I welcomed everybody to Congregation Beth Yeshurun, and I offered this kind of opening understanding of Jewish tradition and how it relates to what they did. So as Jewish people read the Bible, when we read the Bible, it's very interesting. If you notice, all the stories in the Bible, God doesn't make miracles happen just by himself, right? So he needs a human agent, a human person to take responsibility, to be the catalyst to make change in the world. The most dramatic example of that, of course, is the story of Moses and the Exodus from Egypt. Right? God could have just gone to Pharaoh and said, let my people go. But for whatever reason, God didn't do that. He enlisted Moses to be the agent, to send the message, to be the catalyst, the leader who was going to help lead the Israelites out of slavery. More relevant to the story of Hurricane Harvey, when God decides to destroy the world with a flood, right? He could have just recreated the world. He did it in 6 days at the beginning of Genesis. He destroys the world. He could have just said, let there be light, and started all over again. But for whatever reason, he didn't. He had a human being. He got Noah and his family to be the agents to save humanity and to save all the animals, to build a boat and to rescue everybody on this boat. So I turned to the agents, these FBI agents, and I said, we didn't have Noah and we didn't have Moses, but we had you 4 agents who jumped into the waters, made them part, brought the people safely onto dry land, and led the people to safety and freedom. And that's the way we understand human history, not only in biblical times, but up until the present time. That God created human beings to be God's agents to make things better, to fix the world where there's problems, to save people, to provide security and comfort, to offer justice and kindness in the world. And a similar instance happens at the beginning of our Torah portion this morning, the continuation from last week. So as I mentioned briefly before, you remember the dramatic scene at the end of last week's Torah portion. This chief of the tribe of Shimon and this princess from the Moabites engage in this public act of, let's call it indecency, in front of everybody. And in the process, she also gets him to commit idolatry, to worship her God. So these are two cardinal sins, right? Illicit sexual relations and idolatry, and they're doing it in public in front of everybody, and a plague breaks out, and it's killing thousands of people. So Pinchas takes a spear and dramatically runs the spear through both of them, one on top of the other, and kills them both in an instant. Now, this is a pretty dramatic scene, and it stops the plague, and it saves everybody. But our sages were very concerned that somebody might feel it was appropriate to be like Pinchas and go out and kill somebody in an act of zealotry. And so what they did was they circumscribed the act of Pinchas and made it limited to his special case. Nobody should think it's permissible to go out and do this today. So what did they say? First of all, these two people were committing, as I said, two cardinal sins, two of the worst sins in the Bible, for which the penalty is death, right? Idolatry and illicit sexual relations. Secondly, in a sense, they were rodefs, they were pursuers. And in Jewish tradition, if someone is pursuing somebody to kill another person, you're allowed to stop that person with lethal force if you need to, whatever force is necessary to stop someone from killing somebody else. The act that these two people were committing was killing thousands of people. So in a sense, they were like a rodef. So you're allowed to stop them with lethal force. Another thing they point out, though, is that if Zimri, the chief of the tribe of Shimon, had turned around and seen Pinchas coming and took out a knife and killed Pinchas first, he would not have been charged with manslaughter because it would have been self-defense. So Pinchas was doing this at some risk to himself because if he had been stopped or prevented by Zimri, it was his own risk. And Zimri would not have been held liable. And there are other elements in ways in which the sages proscribe the act of Pinchas so that people shouldn't think you can go out and just kill people. Nevertheless, Pinchas did a dramatic act in a case of time of desperate need, and he prevented catastrophe from happening. He jumped into the situation, acted on God's behalf, and did something that was necessary for that particular moment. And so just like Noah in his day and Moses in rescuing the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, Pinchas did what was necessary to stop this plague. We might also add to that Nachshon ben Aminadav, you may remember, was the chief of the tribe of Judah, jumps into the Red Sea before it's parted, according to this Midrash, the rabbi's commentary. He jumps into the sea before it's parted, and the water gets up to his nose, up to his head, potentially drowning before it actually parts. He took a dramatic action to get people to come in and follow him into the water. This was not a time for standing around and complaining to God. This was a time for action, and he took action. He jumped into the water, and then it parted. And that's how we understand our role and the role of humanity even today. For each of us, it's our responsibility to be God's hands and feet, to take action where necessary to promote justice and fairness, kindness and compassion, comfort and security to people who we see need help. Who knows, as Mordecai says to Esther in the book of Esther, another case of human action, who knows whether you weren't put in this world for this moment in time to be the person to help somebody else in need. And so that's the message from Pinchas and from the Torah portion, and the message I gave to the four officers. Shabbat Shalom.